Welcome to Offscript. Tune in every week to hear the stories of and insights from NPs. We're your hosts, Maxine and Danielle, two technologists who are passionate about the future of patient care.
Our guest today is Diana Page, a neurology nurse practitioner, burnout recovery expert, and entrepreneur. Diana founded Self-Care Catalyst in November 2019, a business dedicated to nurse burnout recovery coaching and nurse well-being. In today's conversation, we discuss Diana's own experience as a nurse and NP and her advice for clinicians struggling with boundary setting, career clarity, anxiety or feelings of overwhelm, and more broadly, their sense of purpose or self. Diana, thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to start with your own brief intro.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm pumped to see you guys again and talk with you again. I think we'll have a really great conversation. But hi, I'm Diana Page. I live in Maine and I am a neuro NP and founder of Self-Care Catalyst, which has been quite the journey. And I've met so many of you and helped so many of you out of the depths of burnout over the years. My website, selfcarecatalyst.com, has a ton of resources if you're looking for them. And I'm really excited to chat with you guys about how to support NPs. It'll be really fun.
Well, the feeling is super mutual, and we're so excited to hear about how you've approached your career and your business aspirations and helping other NPs. So maybe to start, when considering roles as an NP, what factors have you prioritized over time?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, my role as an NP has kind of shifted over the years. When I first went into the NP world, I graduated NP school and I was like, I know exactly what I don't want to do, which of course is now what I do now, which is kind of hilarious. And I've done it for 13 years. But my role has changed over the years because my life has changed over the years. And my first NP job, I was inpatient mostly and like a little dabble of outpatient hybrid kind of role, which worked for a while until it didn't work. And that was a multitude of factors, which I'm sure we'll talk about today, with boundaries and kind of toxicity within the workplace, but also like my schedule and the work life didn't really align with my life, especially as I decided to like have children and be married. And it just, my priorities kind of shifted. And I really learned the value of having a life outside of work, which when I initially started as an NP, I really didn't have that mindset, which is something hopefully we'll talk about today, because that's something that really, as a new NP especially, like having that lockdown is so important to help keep that work-life balance optimal. But knowing what your values are, which is something that I've really used as my North Star over the years, is the way to kind of really determine what you want from your career and how your career can align with your life so that you feel really good in your career and feel like you're making a difference in helping your patients, but you're not doing that as a sacrifice to all the other fun stuff outside of work.
That is such a balanced approach to thinking about your career. And it's so obvious how much time you spent in really curating how to think about these topics, which can be so intractable at times. Do you have mentors or role models or peers who really guided you in your journey to this kind of understanding?
So it's interesting. I've definitely had many mentors. Some are like clinical mentors where people within my workplace, like allies, and hopefully all y'all listening, like know who your allies are within your workplace, because it's so important to know who you can go to, not only to ask those like, hey, I found this really odd exam finding. Like, can we talk about what this means? Like, I'm not really sure. Those kind of questions, but also the like, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. My schedule doesn't really make sense to me. I'm finding that this isn't working. Can you help me talk this through or figure out how to navigate this? Having those people within your workplace is really important. So I personally have a lot of allies within my workplace. Most actually, oddly enough, are physicians in this job. In my last job, most of them were nurse practitioners who were more senior to me, who had been there for a while, who were just incredible resources and really had like a solid outlook about work-life balance and kind of knowing what you're worth and advocating for that, which is really important. In terms of like the personal development, self-growth, all the mindset work and all the like the business stuff that I've done over the past few years, that's like a completely different beast. A lot of what I've learned was just in the personal development world was podcasts and reading books and talking to other people who I admire. And I'm like, wow, you're doing things in a way that I feel works better than what I'm doing. What are some resources that you've used? There's a ton of amazing personal development stuff out there. There's probably more than you could ever consume. So I think it's important to find like who seems to align with you and their personality seems to align with you. And then in business, I've had multiple business mentors who have really changed the game for me because I didn't have like a business degree. I had a vision of what I wanted to do and the materials and like the knowledge that I wanted to like give to others, but I didn't know how to like get from point A to point B. So I've hired multiple business mentors. And now I actually coach other NPs to start their businesses, which has been beautiful to see other NPs kind of do similar things and make money on the side and be able to cut their hours and things like that. So I think there's all these little pockets in life where mentorship is just invaluable, and truly, like, it really is invaluable to have other people to share those experiences with.
Absolutely. I love that answer and the importance of both having the one-on-one mentors and the people that you build a relationship with, but also really leveraging the resources that are out there, whether they be free or paid, podcasts, books, videos. There's so many different ways. There's also so much value in the content curation piece. And I think you spoke to this as well, but there are so many resources that are out there, but figuring out the resources that will work for you. And often it's just some trial and error too.
Yeah. It's like infobesity out there, right? It's like there's so much information out there. It's easy to just get caught up in educating yourself without actually like implementing and taking action and doing the thing. It's like, oh, I want to learn. It's like that perfectionism kind of kicks in, right? Especially like when you're starting a business or you're starting a new job. It's like you just want to learn everything and like be prepared. But the reality is like things are going to happen. It's going to evolve. You're going to learn as you go. And you just have to like take that first step and trust the process in a lot of ways, and not get caught up in just like, oh, I need to read just one more book, or like, oh, if I just knew more about this one topic. You probably know more than you think, and you just need to like trust that you can handle it.
Yeah, absolutely. At some point you need to transition from learning to doing, and you'll do a lot and learn a lot through the doing. So that makes so much sense. This feels like a natural time to transition to talking about Self-Care Catalyst and how you actually decided to take action and build something. Would love to hear a bit more about what inspired you to launch Self-Care Catalyst.
Well, it really started from the fact that I am myself a burnout survivor. So like I said, in my first job, burned out pretty intensely to the point where I left that job and went to a different state and moved home. I was like, I'm out. I gotta go. I actually almost left nursing altogether. Like, I really truly thought it was me. It took a lot of this like inner work and doing the work to really see that it wasn't a me problem. It was definitely like a system problem, which leveraged my confidence to be able to like do the things I do now years later, but also like have really healthy work-life balance and the way I view my career and life. So left my job, had kids, got married. There was like a gap of time where I was just kind of head down, grind, do your job. I really love my job I'm in now. Like, things were great, had kids, and you're just kind of doing momhood. They're little, you're not really like able to do anything else. And when they got a little older, like 3, 4, I was like, oh wait, I have like free time to think about like what other things I want to do. I've always been someone who's kind of been entrepreneurial anyway. You're gonna laugh, but I had like a scrunchie business when I was like 10. Where I made scrunchies and sold them. Like, I've always had the itch to be an entrepreneur and like do things on the side. But when I had that pause and that ability to look around, I noticed that truly most of the people that I graduated my NP program with were burned out, unhappy, disillusioned, really weren't sure whether or not they were going to stay, where they going to go. They just weren't happy. They didn't know what to do. And I was like, okay, hold on. Why aren't we talking about this? People on social media at that time really weren't talking about healthcare burnout a ton. There was like a little bit out there, but really not anything. So I decided to start a blog because I was like, I have these resources. I didn't know what to do. I had an Instagram for like my cat and my kids. So I started the blog, and then I transitioned to Instagram like end of 2019. And of course, 2020 came. And it was at that point where I was like, look, I have these skills and resources and this knowledge that I know is going to help. And that was my way to serve during the pandemic, because I wasn't frontline, I was outpatient. And so I just cranked out content every single day, free content, support, connecting with people, just putting whatever I could out there to help people navigate the storm. And at the end of that year was when I put together my mentorship program, which we're in our 12th cohort, which is very exciting. So it's been a beautiful process of not only bringing people together in community, which I think as a nurse and NP, as an NP student, it's so important to have people in your community that you can connect with and be validated with. You're like, oh my God, I'm experiencing that too. And then also be with someone who can kind of lead you through the storm with the tools that you need, like to set those boundaries, self-advocate, really even identify what burnout looks like, have solid routines outside of work and leave work at work so you're not charting from home every day. Those things are really important. And sometimes when you're just slammed, you just don't know where to start. So you just throw up your hands and say, forget it. So I really created this business to support nurses, to support NPs who were at risk for or suffering from burnout through things like mentorship, workshops. I have a ton of free resources through doing podcasts with people like you. I've done a lot of podcasts, are all on my webpage. So if people want to listen to other episodes of other podcasts, you can. And yeah, it's been really, really beautiful. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Your story of this business and how it came to be is so amazing, because there seems to be this experience of having to forge your own path and the challenge of that. And then instead of, just being like, okay, I got myself out of this, let me move on, let me move forward, you're immediately turning back to your community and saying, how can I give this to others so others can have it? And then you're creating communities that then allow other people to help other people as well. So it's this amazing ripple effect.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like I work with a lot of NPs who then use the tools that we've taught them in mentorship to then help their patients. Because a lot of these tools are things that are relevant truly to anybody, like whether you work in healthcare or not. Just people in general in the United States are just tapped. They don't feel like they have time for the things they want to do. They don't even really know what they like anymore. There's a lot of just this, where do I start? So it's actually really beautiful to see some of the NPs that I work with kind of send me messages like, oh my God, like this happened today. And it was so fulfilling. I could be a better provider to my patient because, I was able to give these resources or mindset shifts or whatever. And I use them all the time too, like with my patients. I think all of this is helpful regardless of your track in life.
Totally. There's a level of self-development where it's, if you can show up better, then how do you impact the people that you're showing up to? And it's so clear from the work that you're doing that it makes a meaningful difference. A lot of the work that you describe, it just feels like it happened so naturally, but you really were building these structures of a business. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what was easier than you expected in that process, what was more difficult than you expected in that process.
Yeah, it's funny. I think in the beginning, especially, the hardest part was the imposter syndrome. I think happens to us as a new clinician too, where it's like, who am I to be doing this? Sure, yeah, I know these things worked for me, and honestly, that's rooted in fear, right? It's okay, well, what if I put myself out there and it fails, or I don't help people, or whatever? So that was a hurdle. And now, again, something that I teach those mindset shifts to people. We have Camp Confidence, which is a workshop that's coming up that really helps clinicians move through imposter syndrome and perfectionism and all those things that really hold us back from taking action. But I will say, once those mindset shift, like you bring awareness to how to move through those, it's so empowering and you can really take action despite fear, which is truly how you grow and you build things. If I didn't take action despite fear, this business wouldn't exist. If I hadn't posted that first post on Instagram or done that first reel, which I was, of course, terrified to do at the time. I'm like, oh my God, I'm making what is even going on? I don't know how to do this. It's kind of like you figure it out. You try things, you learn from your mistakes, and you show up because And like my North Star was like, look, even if I hit one NP, I needed to hear that today. I get messages all the time like, oh my God, I needed to hear that today. That's what it's about. Who cares if it's just one person or 200 people? It's like, it still matters. And it matters if you are able to share that knowledge. So I think the hardest part was just that mindset of, am I doing this? Like, what is happening? And also, like, it happens. I'm 4 years in, right? And I'm still from time to time, oh my God, this is hard. Like, what am I doing? And those things come up, but you have to move through it because hopefully, whether this is the right thing for you or not, whether it's business or your job or whatever. And then the easiest part was truly just the connecting with other human beings. I love human beings so much. I love nurses. I love NPs. I love helping women. It makes me so happy to connect with people and talk to people and just hear about what they are struggling with and like about their life. And that's why I really love what I do as a clinician too. Like I love talking to patients and being with other people. So I think that's the easiest thing, is just really being with people and supporting them in an authentic, meaningful way where they feel like psychologically safe, they feel heard, and then they leave with tools that are super easy for them to implement and have things be better in a relatively short period of time.
Really appreciate those reflections. And it's interesting that a lot of the hard parts are also the things that you're teaching then in the self-care catalyst work. So it's, again, it just is a cycle that feeds back into itself and helps you continue to grow the business and help other people. What are your goals for self-care catalyst moving forward?
So my goal is really to just continue to show up for nurses and NPs. Honestly, like I want to have 50 cohorts of my mentorship program, the Resilient Nurse Roadmap, and we've enrolled every cohort. Everyone has had a positive experience. We have so many incredible testimonials, track data, because of course you have to have numbers. So we do metrics at the beginning and at the end, and it's just beautiful to see that it works for people. So I want to continue to just make it better each and every season. We bring in experts that are topics that I'm not an expert in. We had like EFT tapping, we had like debriefing the front lines come. We had like a play workshop once, which was really fun. So I want to continue to just bring in cool things, connect with more people, host more workshops. This year I launched a charting boot camp to help NPs with like honing in on their time management and charting skills, so they're not bringing work home and not spending time with their family. So that was really exciting to have that new offer. Continuing to provide free resources. I really pride myself on having accessibility. So if people need support on boundary setting, there's a free resource. There's also mentorship where you can learn about it. There's a little masterclass that they can purchase for $30. There's all these levels of support. So it's really accessible to anyone. So I want to continue to create resources in that format. So people, regardless of what they can or can't do, they have the ability to get access to the information. Yeah, I would love to do more retreats. We did a retreat a couple years ago, which was really fun. I'd love to do more of that. We'll see.
Those are awesome goals. And it's so clear from how you talk about things that you're very mission driven and very impact oriented and really subscribing to the mentality of iterating to greatness. It's good things take time, and every year it seems like you're just making things better and better, which is wonderful. Getting down to the nuts and bolts, would love to hear how you define burnout and also what some of the common signs and symptoms are in your colleagues and patients. I know in your case it translated into actually leaving your job, but what are some of the earlier indicators?
Yeah, earlier the better. Prevention over intervention always, right? So burnout, by definition, is a level of exhaustion that kind of surpasses your usual, like, oh, I'm so tired. It kind of, the level of exhaustion that doesn't really respond to your normal recharge activities. Also a sense of disconnection from your job, that apathy of like, ugh, whatever. A lot of times for us as clinicians, that manifests as feeling like you don't even really care what your patient's saying. You don't really care what their experience is. You're just kind of going through the motions. And then also that lack of self-efficacy, meaning that you just don't feel like you're making a difference. It's kind of like that lack of fulfillment. What I do doesn't matter anyway. So what's the point? I would say those are the defined 3 hallmarks. I will say though, it manifests differently for a lot of us. So for me, burnout took me by surprise. I was burned out a heck of a lot longer than I knew. Because in my NP program, they never talked about burnout. They never told us, hey, these are signs that like maybe you're overextending yourself, or they never mentioned the word boundaries. They never mentioned like work-life balance. The mentality was always to be good as a clinician. You got to work your butt off. You got to like get those, pass the test, do well in clinical, like all the thing, check the boxes, right? But the well-being box was never even mentioned. So for some of us, it manifests as like physical symptoms, like that kind of sense of impending doom when you leave the house in the morning, that pre-shift dread, GI symptoms, headaches, things like that. Tension can be very emotional. Some individuals get very depressed, anxious, or your heart races, panic attacks. It can manifest as kind of withdrawing from things that you normally would enjoy, which kind of obviously is a sign also that you may be depressed. For me, I was very irritable. I very much did not feel myself. I was very not fun to be around, and I think I'm kind of fun to be around, but I was not fun to be around. Just snippy, very low tolerance for anything. So I think just being tuned into yourself, this is something we talk about in mentorship, is being self-aware is so important. And it's not like you're like, oh, it's so woo-woo. It's like, it's really not. Like you really need to be able to check in with yourself literally every day. That's why like I have a post-shift reflection tool on my website. That's a great way to take that pause. very like specific, easy questions that you can ask yourself. Or first thing in the morning, when you wake up first thing in the morning, instead of picking up your phone, maybe taking 5 minutes to just be, hey, like, what do I feel? What do I want to feel? What's step one to get there? Because if we don't check in with ourselves, oftentimes things just go off the rails. And that autopilot mode that we're in can lead to overwhelm and spiral into burnout at times if we don't put those stopgaps in place. The definition of burnout for me, but I think it does vary depending on the individual. Not everybody gets irritable. Not everybody gets depressed. But I do think that that level of exhaustion and apathy are incredibly common.
It's good to know the key hallmarks like apathy and lacking self-efficacy and how that might manifest. And it's also really helpful to have that reminder of just do daily self-reflections and check in with yourself, because I imagine it's quite easy for someone to not realize that they're starting to feel some of these early indicators as well. And in your view, what are some of the primary causes of burnout among nurse practitioners today?
Charting. I think that the volume of administrative tasks that we have, the non-billable tasks, is quite extreme at times. And there's a lot of pressure to do more in terms of patient volume, leaving very little time for those administrative tasks. So I think that there's a lot of like system issues, which obviously, depending on your workplace, can look one way or another. You know, like some are incredibly toxic, where you have toxic leadership, they really don't value your well-being at all. It's all about numbers, it's all about cash, there's no support. And then you have a gradient of work environments. You know, like the work environment I'm in now is incredibly healthy, but I also had to advocate for a lot of what I have in terms of like my schedule and admin time, and if I'm covering someone, like what that means for my schedule. And so there's a lot of nuance to it.
Totally, yeah. It's unfortunate how much of it is systematic and systemic in nature. It's good to know that there are ways to get around it as well. And I think that maybe it's a natural time now to transition to talking about some tips for preventing burnout. So wondering if you have any recommendations for clinicians on preventative measures to reduce the risk of burnout.
Yeah, actually, it is important to recognize that in addition to like the system issues, there are things that we can kind of recognize in our own world that can contribute to burnout, right? So our lack of boundaries, for example, and we'll talk about with the tips, like how to set healthy boundaries, but like people hear the word boundary and they're like, ooh, you know, they tend to kind of freak people out because they feel like very socially threatening. But truly, like if you don't have healthy boundaries with your job and your workplace or with those toxic people, that is a huge driver of burnout. There are so many drivers of burnout. I mean, people who are working parents, you know, they obviously have a lot of commitments outside of work. There's single parents who, of course, on top of that have challenges. There's lack of resources within your work environment. So if you're like the only NP in a sea of physicians and none of them want to help you, that can be problematic. Not having adequate time for your visits or just resources in general. You know, there's that the concept of like moral injury. You lack the resources that you need to be able to do your job well. And there's a disconnect with what you know as a clinician is the right thing and what you can do based on the resources that you have or the red tape that you have within your practice. Literally, there could be a whole podcast of drivers on burnout, and there's books written on it. But I will say the system stuff, a lot of times we can't change. Right? We can advocate, we can pound the pavement, we can do our best, we can set our boundaries and what have you, but also like we need to look, and that's what we do in mentorship, is really look at like what we have control over in terms of how like our life pruning, what in our life is in alignment, what's not, what are we spending our time on, what do we want to be spending our time on, our energy levels, our habits. There's all these things that we can tweak and hone in on to help, which brings us to tips and tricks. So with tips and tricks, I think the biggest thing, and if anyone follows me on social, you know, boundaries will set you free. And boundaries as an NP can be both in terms of leaving work on time. You could be setting boundaries with your patients. In the charting bootcamp that we just did recently, people were talking about it's hard because patients come with like 37 problems. They want all of them addressed. So sometimes the boundary is saying, I hear that you have all these concerns. What's bothering you the most? Let's start there. We're only going to be able to do XYZ today, but if we can't get to the rest, we will set up a separate visit or a telehealth or what have you. We have to be able to set expectations with our patients or with our work environment in order to optimize our own needs, because we have needs too. And if we overextend ourselves, then we burn out, and then we can't serve our patients, we can't serve ourselves, we can't serve our families, our friends as well as we'd like to. So boundaries are huge. That is something we dive into deep in mentorship, because there's actually a great freebie on my website that's like scripting for boundaries for like different scenarios. Highly recommend that. I feel like the communication around boundaries kind of skeeves you out and you're like, this like makes me really nervous. Like that will give you some like one-liners that you can just have to deploy, which is super helpful. I will say that having some, like we talked about, time for self-reflection is important, even if it's 5 minutes. I like, before you even leave the parking lot, taking 5 minutes to just say, what went well today? What didn't go well? Like, what did I do really well? We're so quick to put ourselves down on all the things we didn't measure up on. It's really important to acknowledge kind of our small wins. It helps boost confidence. It helps build momentum in the direction we want to go. It's like that growth mindset versus lack mindset. And then I think looking at your life outside of work, what does that look like? What do you want it to look like? What do you like to do for fun? A lot of us, especially when we're burned out, we forget, oh, hobbies. Those are a thing. I haven't seen so-and-so in a really long time, and they're really important to me. How can I prioritize those relationships? Looking at your life outside of work as being equally as important as your clinical life. We want to do really well as clinicians. Like, we want to be like the good NP, the reliable one, and all that stuff. But we can't have the reliable one equal people just dump on you, and there's no limit. Because takers are going to take, boundaries are just limits, and like we really truly need to cut the cord at the end of the day and have a life outside of what we do.
These are such helpful tips because they're both about really turning inward and defining what your values are, and then giving tactical ways to use that knowledge, that self-knowledge, to then actually make your outside life match kind of what your inside goals are. And this feels in many ways preventative. And also, if you start to see early stages of burnout, that you can use those tools to realign, basically. Once it's more intense, do you have recommendations for that stage?
So for sure. So when you are in the depths, you need to know, what are the triggers? What's the root of the root, right? Is it a certain toxic colleague? Is it your schedule? Is it all the above? Is it that you feel under-resourced? Is it staffing? Like, what is the problem? Like, you really have to like hone in on what those burnout triggers are, because it's really hard to know, I'll just do XYZ and then it'll be better. Because it's like, no. In my personal experience from my job and why I left, not every job you have to leave. Plenty of the people I work with, one in particular right now, like she came to me feeling super disillusioned. She was there late every single day. She was like, I don't even know. I think this job just isn't for me. I don't love it, like blah, blah, blah. Now she's been using the tools. She actually is like, I don't know what to do with my time now. Like, I have to figure out like what I actually want to do, because I'm getting out of work on time. I'm coming home. I actually like my job. I just needed a couple boundaries and needed a life outside of work to recharge. So it's not always like you have to leave. I want to say that disclaimer, because I did leave, but that was because when I looked at my burnout triggers, they were all things that I had zero control over. And I was in like a super toxic work environment. So nothing that I did, no boundaries that I set were going to work, because they didn't care. They really didn't care. I just didn't feel supported. And leadership really didn't respond in the ways that I thought would be helpful. So despite my allies within my NP cohort, it just wasn't enough to keep me there. But if you look at your burnout triggers and you look at that kind of work-life balance, and that's what we do in mentorship. So if you're in that situation and you really need support, even if you don't join us in mentorship, you can message me. Happy to kind of start to talk it through with you. But sometimes it just requires a couple of shifts. And maybe there's things that you can tweak with your mindset too when it comes to feeling the need to overgive. A lot of times we overgive because we want to be liked. We want people to appreciate us. A lot of times we don't have to be doing that in order to feel fulfilled and valued. And a lot of times it's just kind of tweaking the way we approach our career and our work environment. I've had some clients take a leave, then kind of figure out what they're doing. Some do switch jobs, but it's important you don't just like knee-jerk react, because you have to do it with intention. Like, you have to understand what the problem is, because you could just go from one to the other and have it be exactly the same.
It sounds like really pinpointing what the specific causes are, and then what your options are for resolution of each of those issues.
Yeah, controllable, uncontrollable, like where are we at? And then looking at the controllable things and seeing what can change, and then taking action. You know, it's about taking action with intention despite fear.
It all comes back to that, right? It's really similar concepts. Yeah. That's a super helpful framework for folks to use to think through the maybe symptoms of burnout they might be feeling. As we're starting to get towards the end of our time, we also want to get your mind a bit on business tips, just because you've built such a great business for yourself. And so one thing that you're super exceptional about in the business realm is social media. And I'd love to hear any tips you might have for clinicians who want to establish a social media presence for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask that all the time. So with social media, it's social. Like, you have to be social. You have to like connect with people, support other people, collaborate with other people. For me, it's never competition with other human beings. I'm friends with all of the burnout coaches on Instagram because it's like, we're all in this together. It's about coming together and supporting each other and collaborating with each other, and then connecting with the human beings that need your support, and then creating the content. Honestly, if you go back, I haven't deleted any of my posts ever. Like, if you go to like the first couple posts I did, it's like a nightmare. They're horrible. But at the time, I'm like, yo, I gotta just do it. Like, I've got to put it out there, because you just have to think of like that one human being that maybe needs to hear the thing that you need to say. If you feel you have something that you want to share, that you feel could help, or that you have a resource or some sort of course or product, whatever it is, it's not sleazy. If you come from a place of connection and authenticity and honesty and like legitimacy, you're going to find your people. And you don't want to just be like talking about selling all the time. Connect with people, like offer resources, offer things for free. I do things for free all the time. I probably do things for free way too much, honestly. But it makes me happy. And when it feels malaligned, that's the problem, right? If it feels like I'm kind of an acts of service person in terms of my like love language, giving gifts, things like that. So for me, it makes me happy. And it has helped build my business, because people will use free resources and then come back to ask for a one-on-one coaching session or join mentorship. So I think that it's really just about working from a place of being true to yourself, but also being honest and authentic with your community and just being there as a human for other humans.
That's amazing advice. Do it even if you're scared, be authentic, and just be social on social. Like, I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Like, keep it simple. It's honestly not that complicated. Comment on people's stuff and don't spend hours on social media. Have time to just live your life. With business, especially early on, the business consumed a lot of my life because I was like so excited about it. For me, I was like, I can't burn out with my business. That would be counterproductive and kind of silly. So it's more like, again, checking in with yourself, just keeping it super simple, okay, like I'm going to connect with people for half an hour right now and then live my life. It's easy to get wrapped up in it. And it's easy to be in that lack mindset of, oh, I only got 3 likes, blah, blah, blah. Or I only got 10 likes or whatever. If you were in a room with like 3 or 10 people and they were like, that was a great talk, thank you so much, you'd be thrilled. But on social, it's like, if you don't have like 200 likes, it's, no. Regardless of the reaction, you're still putting yourself out there. You're still building your community, and it's all super important. And the things that don't land, you just use as feedback, and you talk to your people. You ask them like, hey, what do you need? What are you looking for? I do that all the time. Hey, what are you struggling with the most? Because you need to keep a pulse on. It's not about me. It's about the community. It's about serving them with what they need.
Absolutely. And I think that also goes back to what you said earlier about having the right North Star, and how your North Star in the beginning was helping just one person. So even if you got just one like or one comment, you reached someone and made a difference for them.
For me with my business, initially my goal was to help as many NPs and nurses as possible. And also I really wanted to like cut my hours at work to 32 hours so I could be more present for my kids, because they were going to be entering school. And when my son started kindergarten, I was able to cut back, and my business was able to like subsidize that income. So for me now, whenever I get into that weird mindset of, oh, like, is it enough? Blah, 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 I'm like, yo, if I can make that gap, that's great. Like, the rest is gravy. So we just have to take the pressure off. It's so easy to slip into do, or this isn't good enough. This isn't good enough. I need to do more. It's like, but do you? Is that a feeling or is that a fact? You're doing a great job. Starting a business is hard. It's a lot. So definitely lean on people, ask questions. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keeping it simple and finding ways to take the pressure off. I think those are 2 really good pieces of advice as well for people to keep in mind. Absolutely. To close, we'll ask you the same questions that we ask all of our guests, one about the system more broadly and one about advice looking forward. So to start, what changes would you like to see in the American healthcare system to really improve patient care?
I would say, because this has been an issue this week for me, I would change the way our insurance systems work and reimbursement for services and medication access for patients. I cannot tell you how many times this week, and this is a driver of burnout for me. I work with patients with epilepsy. So if I can't get them their medication, they have seizures that can kill them. So for me, the moral injury that's behind an insurance company that says no to a medication that this patient requires, and then they have seizures as a result of that, is a huge problem for me. But that would be the biggest thing, is just the way our insurance functions.
It is so challenging. We've heard this from several clinicians. I know what my patient needs and everything indicates it medically. And I have this barrier that is completely outside of the medical context that's disallowing me from giving my patient what they need, which of course is so challenging. So,
and it's a time suck, honestly. They're just saying no and no and no, hoping you'll give up. But it requires all this time, and then you can't do other work. So, yes, that's endlessly frustrating.
to close, wondering if you have some advice, either clinical or non clinical, that you want everyone listening to walk away with.
I would say when you look at how you view productivity and success in your life and your career, think about it truly not just in terms of the boxes that you're checking, the things that you're doing day in and day out, especially when it comes to your job. Think about what success and what productivity truly looks like to you, because there's so much more than your to-do list. I always say in mentorship, we have our to-be list, which, is all those things that matter to us that are equally as important to all the things that we're checking the box for at work or even at home, like the laundry and all the things. We have to create space for ourselves in our life, because if we don't, we get left behind. So it's really, truly, I encourage all of you, like even after listening to this podcast, just to think about like one little pocket of time that you can carve out for yourself this week, even if it means you just go for a walk or have some time to read a book or reflect. Really start to make that a priority and make it a habit, because it's really important.
That's a beautiful concept of really making sure that you have a to-be list in addition to your to-do list, and having a broader definition of productivity and success. Love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing so much wisdom. We learned a lot and really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.